Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. I would be fired up for any podcast if I knew I was spending time with one of the most intelligent people that I know. And I would be fired up if I knew that I was spending time with one of the most mentally tough people I know. I would also be fired up if I knew that I would be spending time with one of the most intellectually hilarious people that I know. And today I get to have all three in the forms of two great leaders and two fierce supporters of STEM and technical learning. Both of our guests are brilliant. Dr. Mark Mone serves as Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now, I confess that I first knew Mark not through education, but through the world of distance cycling. We both have a mutual interest in distance cycling. We'll get to that and a variety of other topics shortly. But for the moment, let me start by welcoming UWM Chancellor, Dr. Mark Mone, to the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Just great to be here. Look forward to this conversation. Thank you for having us.
Now, you've brought another guest along with you, Mark, who's also a great friend of ours, UWM Provost Dr. Johannes Britz. I've gotten to know Johannes quite well over the last several years. He too is brilliant, as is Mark, and his quick wit and refreshingly quirky sense of humor always leaves me with a smile. Dr. Britz, so glad you could join us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt. As Mark said, we're looking very much forward to our discussion today, and it's just good to see. And I wish we could have our virtual meeting somewhere in the coffee shop, but here we are.
And it won't be long before we're able to do that. For now, we will make do with the recording as it is, and we are looking forward to it as well. I want to begin with a question for the Chancellor. Now, Chancellor Mone, I've commented to a number of people that the profile of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the 6+ years that you've been Chancellor has really, really risen. And I mean that sincerely. You've done such a phenomenal job of being a huge advocate for higher education, particularly for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. What is it about that institution that makes it so special to you personally?
Well, thanks, Matt. I think we have really come into our own, and it's not on me. It's just an incredible team that's brought it forward. But I think there's three things that, having been at UWM for going on 32 years now, I can say with a little history. Number one, it's our students and their work ethic. Our students they're battle ready. They work, they just go out and they make a difference. And so today we've got about 200,000 alumni from Wisconsin that really make a difference and go all the way to CEO levels and really are the most diverse, hardworking student body you've ever met. So that's one. Number two is an amazing faculty and staff that have allowed us to come from a commuter urban campus history to one of the top research universities in the country that's enabled powerful partnerships in so many areas that I know we'll explore today and the kinds of things that we're doing with you. Third is really an engaged university. The partnerships, the types of things we're doing with Northwestern Mutual and Marquette, the types of things we do with medical college, with manufacturing organizations of all types, with the number of educational providers, but it's that kind of spirit of really making a difference in the community. So those are the three areas that I think are pretty special about UWM.
So certainly that spirit creating a high level of excitement around all of the great work that you're doing. I love the fact that you point to the collaboration, not just within your institution, but with other institutions of higher education. We're going to get into some of that as our discussion goes along this morning, also pointing to your great students and your amazing faculty. And having been engaged with UWM over the years, I would certainly concur with those observations. I want to talk a little bit now about just this whole idea that I introduced in the beginning of our presentation, in the beginning of our discussion today, around mental toughness. And I suggested that you were one of the most mentally tough leaders that I know. I learned that firsthand. You and I have done several distance cycling events together. I think the longest, for our listeners who aren't familiar maybe with Midwestern geography, on a couple of occasions, we rode our bikes from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, up to the tip of Door County to Ellison Bay. You can find those spots on the map, but the direction or the route that we took, that was a good 205 miles, give or take, that we managed to do in a day. That surprises a lot of folks. And I know beyond that you have done distance cycling rides all over the United States and beyond. I'm curious to know, Dr. Mone, as you think about those challenging cycling rides, what is the most difficult cycling ride you've ever completed? And then how is that mental toughness necessary in distance cycling How does that lend itself to your ability to execute your responsibilities as Chancellor of UWM?
Well, thanks, Matt. It's a great context. And, you and I are very much alike. Once you get started on the cycling discussion, the rest of the interview is all over because we may never come back. And I'll point out as we go down this path that, as it turns out, you may know that Johannes is a pretty amazing cyclist himself. He's known for endurance feats because he rides throughout the year, and now he swims throughout the year in Lake Michigan. So he's got some amazing perspectives also on the mental perseverance and grit. To me, in terms of the most difficult, I think that it's hard to say which one because they're all at different times and they're all supported in different ways. So I'll give you an array of three. The Colorado triple bypass, that's an intense ride because of the vertical feet in a day, 10,000 plus vertical feet. It's only 125 miles, but it's those vertical feet that really make a difference. But it's midsummer, so you don't quite have all the legs that you do later in the summer. I think in the same category, though, probably edging that out a little bit is the ride. And the reason for that is that we were unassisted. We were our own self-support. Some of these other rides, like when we did Raw together, which is also up there right across Wisconsin, whether you do the version from La Crosse to Green Bay, or you do the version, which is the more difficult version, when we did from Des Moines to Kenosha, the vertical on that, and people are surprised about that in Wisconsin, that you can have that much vertical. But the point of these is that it's not just the rides those days, that's the test, but it's the preparation and the resilience that you build, and it's about endurance. And to me, that's the key. And that, I think, is the metaphor for leadership in so many different successful settings. You've got to be in for the long haul. These are not sprints. These are really long distance rides. But I think that's the character. It's about grit. And I credit our students with having that. And I think that's a mental toughness factor that really helps us all overcome. And Matt, I know that you have benefited from that and admire not just the riding, but you want to get there at the end of the ride and you want to swim out to Washington Island and do a 2-mile swim in the coldest water around. So you've got that quality too. And I think you really appreciate how important it is because we're going to have tests every day. I mean, I can tell you this morning, the kinds of issues that we're dealing with, whether it's on the political front, the financial front, student parent front, or you name the issue, and the very serious issues associated with the pandemic, the types of issues that we're dealing with that are existential. And those are very serious types of things. And we're not immune in education at all from the same types of demands and pressures that you see really in any different sector. So I think it's a critically important quality of leadership. And I'm really glad to see so many people that can persevere with that.
Well, and whether we call it mental toughness, we call it grit, certainly you, Chancellor, and your team. Thank you for reminding me of Johannes' escapades on the bike, riding all through winter and certainly in Lake Michigan as well. And other members of your staff, in addition to that, certainly lending themselves well in terms of those personality traits to continuing to grow the profile of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now, you're in the city of Milwaukee, of course, and that city is represented by a number of well-recognized universities, four-year institutions, which include, of course, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. In that sea of institutions, and you mentioned the value of collaboration as well, but how does UWM go about differentiating itself among others in your city?
I'll give you 5 quick examples. Number one, we're the only urban R1 in the state. R1 is a designation of the Carnegie research institutions across the country. Out of almost 5,000 universities, there's only 2%. There's 121 of them. And we're one of 2 in the state. Madison, of course, the other one. That enables significant partnerships and much quality associated with that. Number 2, diversity. We're the most diverse 4-year academic institution, not just students of color. We have over 6,300 students of color compared to the average of 1,700 across the UW system. The next closest, Madison, has fewer than 5,000. But we also have the largest number of military veterans, non-traditional students, first-generation students, and LGBTQ+, top 30 LGBTQ+. So diversity, all different types. Number 3, our size. We have so many different programs, graduate, undergraduate, certificate, master's programs. It's pretty amazing in terms of the array of programs. So the size and the offerings across our 12 schools and colleges, pretty amazing. And 4th, our alumni base. I mentioned that before, but 80% of our students or more come from Wisconsin and then stay in Wisconsin for their careers. So 5,300 students a year. Think about that in terms of going into the talent pipeline. No other campus can really claim that size that stays here. A lot of schools draw from people outside, but a lot of times they leave the state. So we really are sticky that way, and that's a good thing. Finally, we're the only campus in the state of Wisconsin that has a school of urban planning and architecture, the only school of freshwater science, both undergrad and graduate, the only school of public health, a number of only types of things at UWM that really do help differentiate us. So those are kind of the 5 snapshots that I'd give.
So differentiation in the number of programs, your alumni, your size, your designation as an R1 research institution, and then finally diversity. And I think I took them out of order in which you delivered them, but certainly all 5 fantastic differentiators for UWM. Dr. Britz, on that final point that I mentioned, the one of diversity, I'd like to explore that a little bit more deeply with you. Milwaukee is one of the most diversely populated cities in the country, and certainly the most diversely populated city in the state of Wisconsin. As you look at the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion, what role do those play in your university's mission and its strategy?
We're a campus for the community, but we're also a campus from the community. And as Mark said, we are the most diverse campus in the state. And about 35% of our new freshmen are all students of color. And we aspire to be a Hispanic Serving Institute. And we rearranged our multicultural centers in such a way that they can support actually students who can come to our campus and identify with people in the sense of their specific needs, where they come from, and their support systems. So I think, as you've mentioned, we are probably one of the most diverse, but also segregated cities in the US. And as an urban campus, I see that then as a moral imperative. And, in my own background and studies on ethics, I was mostly influenced by Amartya Sen. He's an economist, but a philosopher as well. And he actually won the Nobel Prize for Economics on Development. And his whole argument is we're all born with talents and gifts. And society must structure itself in such a way that it allows people to become who they really want to be. Be it a hairdresser, be it an engineer, be it a nurse, be it a teacher, be it just somebody who stays home, doesn't matter. But we need to organize the society in such a way that people can become who they really want to be. And he calls that human well-being. And I always thought as an educator, where I can make a difference is to allow people to become who they want to be. And we in our campus, with the diversity, with the economic disparities that we see, that is the moral imperative, to really allow that equal opportunity for people to become who they want to be. So we are a campus for and from the community. We have the moral imperative. Internally, we organized and we continue to reorganize ourselves to be a campus representing diversity, right? As I mentioned, the Hispanic Serving Institute, multicultural centers. We have now introduced, under the leadership of Mark, anti-bias training. We are one of the top ranked campuses when it comes to veterans. We have the Women Resource Center, LGBTQ+. We're one of the highest ranked in terms of a LGBTQ+ friendly campus. And then, of course, don't forget international students. You look at diversity, because I'm from an international background as well. So we have the Center for International Education looking after our international students. With all the policies and visas and restrictions, they are also very much exposed to the adaptation in a campus where they can feel welcome. Externally, we have the clinics in the city. We work also under the leadership of Mark with the MCube initiative, which is between us, MATC, and the Milwaukee Public Schools, where we really want to enhance their graduation rates, a pipeline through MATC to our campus, a major initiative with a lot of successes. And then also recently, we reorganized also our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity to also have more people of color on our cabinet with Mark. And then just about a year ago, we signed on the Moonshot Initiative from EAB, which is a regional initiative. And currently we have 4 campuses, us, Cartridge College, Parkside, and MATC, which made a commitment. We are committed to eliminate the equity gap. That's on record. So for us, it's one of our highest priorities as we moved on. And that's where I thought Mark might say a few words here, because he took us also in leadership to be the first campus to sign the MMAC's Region of Choice Pledge, and the largest organization actually to sign off on that. And that simply means we are now also committed to increase by 2025 our leaders and managers of color at UWM by 25%, and also our employees by 15%. Those are commitments that we have made that reflects not just the mission, but the moral imperative as a campus for this community in which we live in.
Thank you, Johannes. I really appreciate the framework that you provided. In a nutshell, in the context of us having the inequities that we have in our region, if you look at the income, poverty, and others, look at the HPGM, the Hispanic Professionals of Greater Milwaukee, look at M7, and look at Mark Levine's research, and the African American Chamber. A number of bodies have come forward and talked about the overrepresentation of occupations of people of color under 40,000 and the underrepresentation in managerial professional roles over $40,000. That's when you see the differences in homeownership, in health outcomes, in incarceration, in number of indicators of wealth and health in our communities. What's the path through that? I mean, the path through that is education, whether it's a 2-year education, 4-year, it's a certificate. There's a number of different things that contribute to that. So UWM can really make a difference, but it's not us alone. It really has to be in partnership. And that's why we've got a lot of others. Johannes pointed out the moonshot is with others, but we also have to do our part and diversify our own workforce. And so that's why we've got this diversity, equity, and inclusion framework that we've elevated, and are really not only staffing that more fully, but engaging in the types of activities that Johannes talked about. But if the region truly wants to diversify and enrich opportunities for everyone, then I think this region of choice piece is critical. And when you reflect back on, if we're putting 5,300 graduates out, there's a source of talent that everybody can benefit from in tremendous ways. There's a lot of diversity in our alumni base. So that's a really neat part of this. And we've got a plan, and we have a 2030 think tank plan that's really a blueprint for our future. Johannes can outline some of the key priorities that he's responsible for in that. That's what's going to enable us to maintain, sustain, and really continue to build on the key strengths of this region. But yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical part of what our future is.
A critical part, and clearly not just words. You're not just talking about it. There's a ton of action, a ton of thought. That, this is certainly a hot topic, if you will, over the course of the last 12 months, but something that the institution clearly has been committed to over a long period of time, given the diversity in your alumni base, given the diversity in your student body. I love hearing you use words like, Johannes, the words commitment, moral imperative. Those are strong words. Those aren't just things that you're thinking about. I also know that you have traveled the world, that you're obviously an international individual. You mentioned that in your last answer. You've worked in higher education in institutions literally all over the globe. What are some of those things that you see other countries doing, Johannes, that you think we could learn from and do here in the United States?
Yeah, Matt, that's, a topic close to my heart. And that's why the pandemic was hard for me, because I still love traveling, and I started that doing at a very young age. And I always tell students, if you graduate from high school and you have a little bit of money to buy an old used car or a brand new airline ticket, buy an airline ticket, because the return on investment is much more, and it gives you much more freedom than that old car. And that's how my life started. I just started traveling at the age of 18. And I never look back with regret on that, because I do think a global citizen brings you a much better perspective on diversity and understanding how people operate. And it just makes you a better person. So that's kind of the philosophy where I come from. And when I saw this question, I thought, there are kind of 6 or 7 points that I thought was interesting to me. The first one is, I'm from South Africa. That's where I grew up. I was at the University of Amsterdam. I taught there. I was at Germany too, kind of connections there. And when I thought, what about coming to the US? I initially thought the US is the same as Europe, because I've never been in the US. And so it was an eye-opener for me to come to the US and see the difference. America is not Europe. I mean, for me, that was so clear. I had a cultural shock when I came here. I didn't have that big shock when I moved Europe, South Africa, or even Asia. For me, but now, of course, I've adjusted. I love it here. There's no better place. I stayed, right? It became my home. And there's no more beautiful place than Milwaukee and the lake and the bike trails. It's just fantastic. But I do think, if you look at differences, I think the first one is, when you look at societal issues, that's everywhere and all around the world. In some cultures, it's less expressed, like in Asian, I find, and I cannot speak because I'm not an Asian person, but I know it's much more structured in the way they operate. In South Africa, currently, the societal issues are tuition. There's a huge demand for free education. and students are in protest and they refuse to register. So they had to actually postpone registration because students said, we will not pay tuition. We want it for free. So that's a major societal issue. Another issue has to do with language and language policy. Afrikaans was initially the language of instruction, and that led, of course, to the revolts in 1976. When we first had the democratic elections in 1994, the Constitution had 11 languages protected by the Constitution, which means, you try to protect the rights also of minorities. And then jokingly in South Africa said, what is the official language? It's bad English. Because it has become the common denominator, right? We don't care if you say he is, we is, she is, as long as we understand one another, we talk. But language, I just read this morning again, the University of Stellenbosch, Afrikaans versus English in the dorms. Can you sing an Afrikaans song or can you only sing an English song? So there's a cultural, political, social dynamic in South Africa. When you come to the US, yes, you also have social issues, but it's more freedom of expression, Black Lives Matter issues, gender discrimination, et cetera, which is different than, for example, in South Africa. I think the second, which I think is one of the biggest changes or differences for me, just to let you tell you a story and a little narrative. When I came here and I was a visiting professor at the School of Information Studies, and I asked the assistant dean there, Chad, I said, so what does it cost for a student to enroll in a master's degree in library science? He said, oh, it's like 23,000. And, I was like Elijah from the Bible. I nearly fell from my chair. I said, $23,000? How does a student pay for it? Now I'm so desensitized on price that I think that's actually a very good deal. Because where I come from, it's kind of close to free, right? It's so subsidized. And I talk now, of course, in 2000. Since then, of course, it became a little bit, that's why you have the revolt in South Africa, because it became more expensive. But in Germany, it's free. So the societal issue is, how do you view education? Is it a public good or is it a private good? In the US, my sense is there's much more lenient towards a private good than a public good that should be supported by society. Because, from the 1980s, state support has declined dramatically in the US. And we still call ourselves public institutions. So I think there's a major difference in how societies view education and the benefit people get from education, to say, okay, I pay for it, but I'm going to get my income later, versus it's an equal right for everybody. It's free, it's societal approach. So I'm not saying which one is right or wrong, but that's a big difference, in my opinion, what I've seen where I come from. And then just two minor things that I've picked up, our academic structure in South Africa is different than in the US. And it's difficult then for students who did a bachelor degree to transfer to the US to study a master's degree, for example, because bachelor degrees is a 3-year degree. We have more the British system. Then you do an honors degree, which is 1 year to prepare you for graduate studies. Then you do your master's degree, 2 years or 1 year, where you do coursework, research methodology, and then you do a PhD. And when you do your PhD, it's on your own. You have one supervisor. And you work on we call it a decapole. It's a thick thing that you write, right? And it's your work with your supervisor. And then it's examined by 2 external blind reviewers. So it's not a committee. So the PhD is not a 5-year full-time investment. So there's also differences in just the academic structure between societies. And then, the other last thing is, when you go to some of the Asian countries, I remember when I was in Taiwan, at a point we talked about online enrollments and stuff, and higher education at that point, I don't know if they've changed now, we're actually opposing students to do online. Whereas in the US, they just pushed online education. Whereas in some of the Asian countries, I find we are not in support of. I think it's just the methodology, the pedagogy, the security, is it honest, et cetera, there's much more cultural against online versus here where it's really. So those are the main differences that I have picked up, just my own personal view.
So language, political structure, we talked about funding, academic structure, certainly the acceptance and propensity to use online learning, all key differentiators that you've seen between elsewhere on the globe and here in the United States. Really, really interesting insights there, Johannes, and not just on those differentiators, but on your path through education and some of your observations about southeastern Wisconsin and how you found your way here. So fantastic listening to your thoughts on those topics. So I have to mention that I was actually with Provost Britz on the day that he made the very difficult decision to move the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to virtual. It was by coincidence. Our daughters are friends. Our daughters at the time were on the same gymnastics team, and we happened to be at an event together that evening. And I know it was a heart-wrenching and difficult decision, and one that, frankly, Provost Britz, you made well in advance of most universities, most institutions of higher education making such a decision. You were out on the cutting edge of a decision like that. And I want to ask you this. We talked after that, it was maybe 2 months later, and you made this point to me. You said you thought that moving to an online model in the way that higher education was forced to do advanced innovation in the world of higher ed by at least 10 years. In what ways, looking back on that and looking ahead, has that advancement manifested itself in higher education?
No, Matt, I think, the unpredictability, and there was no playbook on COVID. You're right. It was the 11th of March, that Tuesday evening, when I shared with you our decision, which was then on the news, because that morning I got all the deans and the department chairs together to say, okay, what do we do after spring break? Which classes can go online, which cannot, which can be hybrid, because we don't know. COVID is now in the US. We think there's 1 or 2 cases. Milwaukee, there's nothing yet. And then that afternoon, there was one thought of a case on one of our locations. And literally within 2 hours, we decided, extend the spring break by a week and make a public announcement that we will flip 6,000 plus sections fully online in 2 weeks. If I was going to tell you, I'm going to bring our campus to an online environment, not in 2 weeks, but in 2 years, it would have been impossible. And I just give credit to our instructors, our faculty, our staff, instructional staff, ad hocs. Nobody complained. And those who had not training, our CEDL, Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, they just jump on it. They provided virtual learning, and we flipped those 6,000 plus in 2 weeks. If you look back, we were fairly successful from a health perspective, because really the cases were limited. We unbundled the campus. We had all the precaution, and faculty and staff just jumped in, and our students just said, this is it. Now, the big challenge for us was, of course, in rural areas where students had to go home. They didn't have fast internet access or no internet access. That's the rural disparities that we have discovered. And as we move through the year, now we're more than a year into this, and we will still go online. Summer come, we will still be online. And we plan now for a normal fall semester, but it will be with vaccine and with masks. That's my prediction. I think COVID will be for us for a very, very, very long time. But because we're so essential, we just have to make this work. Coming back to your question, was the innovation and the application of technology to truly unbundle this amount of courses that we have done. That's what I mean by when we jumped ahead, right? That because on our campus, we have like 12,000 students taking one or other form of online course. We have like 30 to 40 degree programs that's fully online. We have a plan to expand more. So that has jumped. Now, for example, our computer science degree is now going fully online. Our master's degree in social work, we're working with them, and say, is this something that can work now for them? So in that sense, we have advanced. And the application, students and faculty become more technology savvy. Now, I think students, of course, meaning if they're a younger generation, they're much more savvy than people who are kind of doesn't use it that much. That adaptability to technology happened. I think that pretty much the future of campuses will be a hybrid future. It will be embedded technology, not necessarily fully online, but the application of technology in support of pedagogy is now with us. And I think the fact that we, in 1 year, could go through this and see now what we have learned and start with the application in what we see as the future of a university. I think that is an unbelievable experience that we went through. That's my take on this.
Without question, there have been tremendous sad stories coming from COVID, of course, and we've all heard them, and our thoughts are certainly with those that have been adversely affected. But it's true, in light of that, there's certainly been silver linings and tremendous innovation that have been driven by the fact that we didn't have a choice and we had to find a better way of doing things. And certainly the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, under your leadership, flipping your entire model in 2 weeks, incredible innovation has come from that. And as we move forward, our students and communities will be the beneficiaries of that innovation. And we're going to leave it at that. I want to thank the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Dr. Mark Mone, the Provost of that same institution, Dr. Johannes Britz, for spending time with us today on the Tech Ed podcast. It has been a phenomenal discussion, and we really appreciate you being here.
Matt, it's absolutely our pleasure. Thank you. You're just an excellent interviewer, great partner, and look forward to many, many future collaborations with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.